Hey everybody, my name's Ryan, and here at eTrailer we install, test fit, and review a lot of different parts. That way we could try to answer any questions those of you might have. And that's exactly what we're doing here today on our 2013 Toyota Highlander. We're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Redarc Tow Pro Liberty brake controller, and we're going to be putting that in conjunction with the ETBC7 as well as the Redarc Tow Pro brake controller adapter plug. So with these Highlanders being really capable SUVs, people tend to use them to do a little bit of everything, and that does include towing some relatively large trailers with brakes. And so if that's what you plan on doing, you're definitely going to want a way to apply those trailer brakes, help slow you down, and keep you safe. And that's exactly what the Redarc is going to do. Now I will say probably the best part, my favorite part about the Redarc is the overall size of it. All you're going to see is this small knob here, and that's really going to help maintain that clean look here in your Highlander. Because of that, it's going to be really easy to get to as well, and we're going to have a lot of different options on where we can actually mount that. And that's really nice compared to the traditional style brake controllers, which are really big and bulky. This one's not going to be in your way. A lot of times those large ones will sit down here by your leg where you push the gas pedal and can kind of just get into the way. That way whenever you're driving down the road, you're not going to have to worry about bumping into it or anything like that. And not to mention too, those more traditional style ones can be a little tricky just to mount up in general, and that's because these newer cars have a lot going on the dash here. And so it can be a little tricky, and that's really not the case at all with the Redarc. So this particular brake controller is good for trailers that have up to 2 axles, which honestly is about perfect for the Highlander. These really aren't equipped to pull trailers larger than that anyway, so it works out real well. And this is also a proportional style brake controller, and that's really important. What that's going to do is apply the trailer brakes the same as the Highlander brakes whenever you hit them. So just to kind of simplify it a little bit, say for example if you're driving down the road and maybe you see a red light coming up and you're barely on the brakes, kind of just slowly coming down to a stop, the trailer brakes are going to do the same thing. On the other hand, let's say if you're on the interstate and there might be a wreck or something ahead and you really have to stand on that brake pedal and come to an emergency stop, the trailer is going to do the same thing. So overall, it is much more predictable, safe, and reliable. You're also going to have the ability to adjust your braking force, and that's what this dial is. So you have 0 all the way up to 10. Usually a good starting point is, right there in the middle, about a 5. But what that's going to do is change more or less how aggressive your brakes come on. So just to kind of give you a scenario, let's say you're running up to the store to get a bunch of material, a bunch of lumber, and you have your trailer and it's really light and you're driving there and you notice that the trailer is braking a little too aggressively, a little too strong. You can actually dial that down some to solve that issue. And so you get there, you load the trailer up, it's nice and heavy, you start driving down the road, you realize that those brakes aren't coming on as strong as you'd like. Then you'd have the ability to turn that up. So really does make your experience great overall, being able to quickly make those adjustments on the fly. And another thing I like is the manual override. So what you're going to do to just apply the trailer brakes is simply just push down on the button, and that's going to do that. And you'd use that in the event of a sway situation, say the trailer starts to get a little squirrely on you, you can hit that manual override and help straighten it back out. I think the button, just being able to push down on it, has a big advantage over some of the traditional style brake controllers. A lot of those have a lever and they work, but the problem with that is if your trailer is getting squirrely, you're usually a little more panicked almost, if you will. And with those levers, you kind of have to reach down and search for them and try to find them and swing them over. With this one, it's right here. You don't even have to think about it. Just take your hand, push it down, and get everything straightened back out. So at the end of the day, a brake controller you really can't go wrong with. In my opinion, they look the best, and they're super user-friendly and easy to figure out. And honestly, if I had to put one on my own vehicle, I would seriously consider the Redarc. We've got a lot of experience with them, and they work the way they should just about all the time. Now, with that being said, as far as getting this installed, it's really not complicated, but there's quite a few steps. You have to route quite a bit of wiring, and just to get everything hooked up. Finding a spot to mount this, as far as drilling into the dash to get it secure, that can be a little nerve-wracking, but as long as you take your time and follow my steps, you should have no issues getting it done at home. Speaking of which, let's go ahead and hook it up together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the back of our Highlander, and first thing that we're going to need to do is mount up our connector plug. Now, the kit does come with this bracket here that I put onto our hitch, and our hitch actually had a mounting point for it. Just bolts right on. If your hitch doesn't have a mounting point, what you need to do is pick up a no drill bracket that you can connect to the hitch. That way you can connect this to the no drill bracket. You can find that at eTrailer here. With that being said, we're just going to feed all the wires through. Line up our 7-way. And what we're going to do to secure it in each one of the holes is take one of these screws and push it through. And then on the back side, you're going to take a flat washer, a split lock washer, and a nut. I'd snug it down. I'm going to use that same hardware combination for our 3 remaining openings here. So once we have all the hardware in place and hand tight, I'm going to come back with a wrench and a screwdriver and just snug them all down. So this connector plug here is going to have 2 4-way flat connectors. One is just going to get mounted to our bracket. It just pushes in there like this. The other one we're going to have to connect to our existing 4-way flat wiring that's already on our Toyota. Now, our customer already had a kit installed a year or 2 ago. If you need a 4-way connector for your Highlander, we have multiple kits right here at eTrailer, so you will need this to get this job done. But with that being said, these are just going to plug right into each other. What I'm going to do is take some dielectric grease and coat the terminals. Gives them a little bit of extra protection. So those will just plug right in. And then it's not a horrible idea either to come back with some electrical tape and just tape everything up real good. That way it'll help keep out any contaminants. So here's what that connector looks like once I taped it up, and I also ran a zip tie around the 2. That way they can accidentally become disconnected. So with that done, now we can focus on the white wire with the pre-attached ring terminal. This is going to need to get grounded to the body of our vehicle, and I'm going to use the included self-tapping screw to do that. What I'm going to do is move this wire out of the way first. But I'm going to go right up here. Now what we can do is get our other wires ready. So you're going to have a blue wire, a black wire, and a yellow wire. The yellow wire we're not going to be using. That's for your reverse light circuit, and you would typically only hook that up if you had a marine application like a boat trailer with surge brakes. In our case we don't, so I just taped it up out of the way. That being said though, the kit is going to come with these pre-attached butt connectors. These will work just fine, but what I like to do is switch them out for a heat shrink type butt connector. It just seals up the ends and gives us a little more protection. So I'm going to go ahead and just switch those out. I'm just going to clip them off. Strip back the insulation here. on the black and the blue wire. And you can find these heat shrink butt connectors here at eTrailer if you want to make the switch as well. But the way these are going to work is it's going to slide over the bearer into the wire, and then you can crimp them down. Now what we can do is grab our bundle of wiring and get those ready to hook up to the other ends of our butt connectors. And what you're going to need to do is there is a gray cover on there. You can just cut a few inches of that off. That'll expose two wires up beneath it, a white one and a black one. You're going to strip the insulation back on each end, and these are going to get connected to our butt connectors here. So the black wire coming from our 7-way is going to get connected to the black wire here in our bundle of wire. It just plugs in and crimps down. And if we grab the blue wire from our 7-way, that's going to get connected to the white wire from our big bundle wire there. So get that crimped. Then I'll come back with my heat source and seal up the ends. So now what I went ahead and did was route our bundle of wiring towards the front of our vehicle into the engine compartment. Here's where it starts. Here's where we made our connections with the butt connectors. I did, however, just put some electrical tape around them too to help keep them protected. With that being said, I route it towards the front. You want to do your best to avoid any hot or moving parts. Went up and over our subframe here. It kind of runs up through there. You want to secure it along the way using some of the zip ties. You can see where the wiring drops down there. And I just followed this e-brake cable here, and where it comes out through here. Now this panel, you don't have to take this off. It does make it a lot easier, or lower it at least. There's a couple 10mm nuts kind of along the edge there. You can pull them out and kind of tuck this down. But that being said, here's our wire going across the brace here. Right up through here. Right along through there. And you can see it where it goes up into the engine compartment. Now the way I got it up there is I used a pull wire. So I had a piece of tubing. You can also use a coat hanger or something like that. But you drop it down from the top to down here to the bottom. You tape your wire to it, and then you're able to pull it right up into position. Now here in the engine compartment, as you can see, this is where our wiring comes up. And what I'm going to do is remove the rest of our gray sheathing. That way we just have two wires to work with. So if you're wondering how to do this, if you kind of feel it, you can feel the two wires, and you can kind of feel a void there in the center. You can carefully take a razor and just very carefully kind of cut through that first layer. You can feel it kind of glide through pretty easily. If it starts getting hung up, I suggest kind of stopping and kind of finding that center again. But I'm just going to do this to separate the rest of the sheath from our wiring up here. With the sheathing off of our wires, now we can take our breakers and mount these up. You're going to want to use the 40 amp breaker and the 20 amp breaker. So I'm just going to mount these probably right here along this part of the firewall. And the way I'm going to do that is by using the provided self-tapping screws. And one on each end of it. And then we'll do the same thing for our 20-amp breaker. I'll just go ahead and more or less put it pretty much right next to it. So now what I went ahead and did was cut our black wire to length and crimped on a ring terminal, just how we did the butt connectors earlier. You strip back the insulation and crimp it on. So you want to use a small ring terminal, and this is going to get connected to the silver post on our 40-amp breaker. So you can remove that nut, slide that over, go ahead and run that nut back down. Just going to snug it up using a 3/8 socket here. And then with the black wire that you had extra that you trimmed off, what we're going to do is kind of make a jumper almost. So this is probably about 2 foot long. One end I put a small ring terminal. The other end I put one of the large ring terminals. And the small end is going to go over the 40-amp breaker here. We're going to put that over the gold post. I'll take the nut, run that back down as well. And the other end of it, we're eventually going to hook up to the positive battery terminal. We're not going to do that just yet though. Now, as far as our 20-amp breaker goes, we're going to need another short jumper wire. Same setup as the other one, large ring terminal, small ring terminal. Over the gold post on this 20-amp breaker, we're going to put the small ring terminal. I'm going to tighten that nut down as well. And then with the remaining wire that you have left over, one end we don't have anything connected to. The other end, however, we have one small ring terminal. And this wire will eventually run inside of our vehicle and get hooked up to the brake controller. The one that we just put on this gold post, that's going to run to the battery as well. So we'll get this tightened down. And start working on routing our wires. Now what we need to do is come over here to the driver's side, inside of our vehicle here. And underneath the dash, we need to create an opening. That way we can route some of our wires from the engine compartment inside of the vehicle. Now, unfortunately, there isn't a factory area or a grommet, if you will, that we can just simply push our wires through. So I did have to drill a small hole to allow us to get those wires inside here. Now, when you're doing this, you want to be extremely careful. We don't have a ton of space under here, and there's a lot of important components on the other side against the firewall, particularly our brake booster and some wiring, things like that. So you want to double, if not triple check where you think you need to drill. Now, fortunately, I found a spot under here that's relatively open and gives us the ability to drill that hole without having to worry about hitting those components. So underneath the dash here, this is where the hole is, and I simply just drilled through the firewall. And then I used a snap bushing to pop into place. That way we don't have to worry about running our wires through a metal surface, which could potentially damage them. So definitely recommend picking up one of these snap bushings. That way there's a soft surface for the wires to run through, and you can find that right here at eTrailer. So now what I've done is just used a pull wire, pushed it through that hole that we drilled into the engine compartment. And on the other side, I taped on our white wire and that black wire that we didn't have anything attached to the other end there. So with those taped on, we can carefully pull this pull wire and feed our wiring into the engine compartment here. Now what I went ahead and did was just cut our wires to length. I like to have a little bit extra, that way it's a lot easier to work with. And then I just stripped back the insulation and crimped on the included butt connectors here. Now we can grab our adapter harness, which is this right here, and get these hooked up to our wires that we ran inside. So the way these are going to work is the black wire from our adapter harness is going to get connected to the black wire here. That's our power source. So you're just going to strip the insulation back. I kind of fold it over on itself to make it a little thicker to fit better in these butt connectors. And pop that in there. Crimp it down. Then we're going to take the blue wire. It's going to be our trailer brake signal. And that is going to get connected to this white wire here. Push that in and crimp it down. With these hooked up, now we can go back under the hood and connect our ring terminals to the positive battery post. So back under the hood, we can come to our positive battery terminal here, lift up the cap, and we have a couple of choices on where we can hook up these two wires. I usually prefer to use this stud here. So you can use 12 millimeter and pull this nut off. However, I tried and it is extremely tight. So I really don't want to risk breaking our battery terminal. So instead, we're going to use this post here. So what I'm going to do is remove this nut with a 10 millimeter. Carefully pull it off. Then our ring terminals are simply just going to slide right over it. Hold them in place and reinstall our nut there. So now back inside, this white wire here coming from our adapter harness, that's going to need to be a ground, so get grounded to our vehicle. So what I'm going to do is take a ring terminal and crimp that on. And I actually found a spot that someone in the past has used as a ground. So I think I'll just utilize that area, and that's going to be right here under the center of our dash. So here's where I secured our ground wire. It's on this stud right here, and I just used a 12 millimeter socket to remove that nut, put the ring terminal over it, and tighten it up back down. Now, as far as this red wire goes, this is going to have to get hooked up to the hot side of your brake switch. And it's a little tricky to see underneath the dash, so I'm going to hook it up and then give you a good look at how I did that. But with that being said, I just kind of want to go over how I'm going to do it down here. So the kit comes with a quick splice connector like this, and how you're going to use that is it's going to clip onto the hot side wire on our brake switch. It does happen to be blue, our factory one, so I just grabbed a piece of loose blue wire I had laying around, just kind of give you an example. So what you're going to do is that cap kind of opens up. You're going to feed that over factory blue wire. Our little splice came out a little bit, so let me just kind of reset that. So it's going to kind of go over that factory blue wire. You can close it up. And then on the other end of it, you can take your red wire, which I do suggest cutting this end off here. You don't need to strip the insulation back or anything. We're going to put that in. Then once both the wires are in, you can use a pair of pliers to squeeze down on the splice. The splice is going to go into both the wires, and that's how they're going to be connected. So once you have that pushed down, you can close up that cap, and that's really all there is to it. Now, as I mentioned, in our case, the wire coming off of the brake switch is blue in color, but you can test it to be sure. And the way you would do that is take the test light, the side here with the Alligator clip, you would simply ground out. So you'd put that on part of the chassis or body of our vehicle here. And then you would use the test light to back probe the wires going into the brake light switch. And what you're looking for is this light to illuminate only when the brake pedal is pushed down. So, for example, you put it onto that blue wire. You don't have any power here or anything, but if you push the brake pedal down, you'll see it light up. As soon as you let off the brake pedal, the light will disappear, and that's how you know you have the hot wire for our brake light switch. So I went ahead and got our red wire hooked up to the hot side of our brake light switch using that quick splice, and this is how it turned out. Now what we can do is find a spot to mount up our brake controller switch. So I've chosen this area right here underneath these factory switches, and I think it'll be easier to loosen up this panel. It's super simple. There's just a 10mm bolt on each side here of it. So you pull that out, and then you'll just kind of firmly grip it, pull back, and it'll release those clips. So we have a little bit of room back under in this area. And wherever you decide to mount it, you need to keep in mind that this portion here is going to have to sit behind the dash, and also there's a plug that takes up a little bit of space too when you plug it into the switch. So just something to keep in mind. We can go ahead and mark it and drill it out. So what I'm going to do to mark out where we need to drill is take this little ring here that comes with the brake controller, and I'm going to hold it where I want it. There's going to be two holes that we need to create. This large one here. I'm just going to take pencil, mark that out, and then this really small one here too. I'll mark both those out. When I have them marked, I can kind of pull this back again. Just take another look and kind of feel back there, make sure that's exactly where you want it before you drill out the holes themselves. Now that we have our hole drilled out, we can push our switch through. So here's where a switch comes through. We could take this trim ring and line that up. Once that's in place, we can take this jam nut. It's going to thread on. The trim ring comes off, not a big deal. You can always just kind of reposition it there. And we want to tighten down this jam nut now. You want to be careful with this. Sometimes, with everything just kind of being so small, it can be a little finicky. And so you want to make sure that everything is lined up properly. And once it is, you can simply just tighten this down by hand. So once you have this started with your fingers, what I like to do is just grab a 12mm socket, and just with the socket, use that to tighten down that nut just a little bit more. You don't need to crank down on these things by any means. Just lightly snug it up to where it don't move around on you. But once that's done, we can grab the cable here, and this end is going to get plugged into the back of the switch. So I'll just line that up and plug it into position. So with all that done now behind the dash, I simply reinstalled it the opposite way. I removed it. Then you're going to take this knob, turn it all the way to the left, counterclockwise. And then if we grab our dial here, you can see there's numbers on it. We're going to take it to where the 0 is facing or in line with this indicator here. the part that sticks up, and this knob just simply pushes right into place. Now we can grab our unit. One end of the cable will plug in to the side of it there. This plug will get connected to the other end. And then what I'm going to do is mount this up underneath the dash, and I'll go ahead and do that now, and I'll show you what it looks like once I have it done. So here's where I mounted up our unit, and I just used a couple of zip ties. You want to make sure that this thing is in a stable place. You don't want it bouncing around or anything like that, and this was a great spot for it where it was relatively easy to get to. And while I was down there, I also used a few zip ties just to help kind of clean up any of our wiring. When you do this, just keep in mind you want to make sure to avoid any moving parts like the brake pedal, the steering column, or even your feet. So once everything's hooked up, you can connect to your trailer or preferably a tester box and push the button down, and you'll see it illuminate. So it'll flash from blue to green, and that means everything is working. Just the flashing sequence means it needs to be programmed more or less, and there's really nothing special to that. You just simply drive around town with or without your trailer and brake several times as you normally would, and eventually it'll calibrate and be good to go. Now, it never is a bad idea just to test everything out. So we have our tester box plugged into our new 7-way, and we're going to check all of our signals, first being our left turn, our right turn, our running lights. Then we can hit our brake lights. In the top right corner there, you can see that we have our auxiliary power. And then we can go ahead and hit our manual override to see that we have a brake output signal. And since the wiring kit also has the 4-pole included, we'll go ahead and check that as well just to be sure. So we have our left turn, our right turn, our brakes, and our running lights. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the Redarc Tow Pro Liberty brake controller in conjunction with the ETBC7 and the Redarc adapter plug.